it started with what I should try and talk people into doing was like, have you Harry Pottered?
Have I Harry Pottered?
Yeah, did you make your way through that series at all?
No, I tried it. I tried starting it a couple of times and was never able to get into it as a young person, and then I've just never come back to it.
So essentially, the gist of the story is evil is back.
Yeah.
And they won't talk about him, and they suppress it like it doesn't exist. And as a result, the entire school for the children gets corrupted. And at some point, there's this place called there's this magical, I don't know, magical places are so much weirder than magical items. But there's this magical place called the Room of Requirement. And you can't find it until you need it. But when they find it, it's because they need it, and what they need it for is because their school has been so corrupted, they have to learn defense against the dark arts. And metaphorically, this is mapping to me to what we're doing here in this little corner.
Mm-hmm.
Because the world around us is following the same arc and trajectory,
for sure,
as far as I can tell. And I got very excited when you discussed the curriculum development that you've done before.
Okay.
Because that is the weak sauce I have in that whole notion for around here. And what do you got for me about educating people and curriculum development?
Yeah. Education starts with fairy tales and myths. Because these are the things that sort of train the eyes of the heart to see the things that you need to see, right? And you learn certain things from fairy tales that you don't really have any other way of learning in the modern world. Sometimes the fairy tales are just like very simple, and so this is why you should be honest. This is why you should confess your sins, right? But there are deeper lessons in the fairy tales that have to do with actually revealing patterns of reality, right? But the thing is that you can't be trained to notice these patterns by simply being told there is a pattern. Even Jonathan, even Peugeot, when he's like doing videos on patterns or symbolism or things like that, he's not telling everything he sees. He's not telling everything that's there, because if you tell somebody, then they won't be able to see it, right? You have to develop, let's say, like the sensory organ yourself. Like the trope of like the wicked stepmother or like the cannibalistic mother in stories like this, right? Well, what's that about? Why does it come up so often, right? Like, it's teaching you there's actually certain ways that love can go sour, right? There's certain ways that love can go sour and become consuming and become worse than hatred. And most of us have to wait till we're way older to sort of figure that out. But if we've been taught by fairy tales to kind of be on the lookout for these things, right? There probably like a lot of bad experiences and bad relationships and things like that we'd be able to be keep out of. But and ultimately, fairy tales are the things that teach us how to read the scriptures. They're the things that teach us how to read hagiography. They're the things that teach us how to be humans. So you expose the children to these kinds of stories that have these fundamental patterns in them, but then you allow them to start to sense and notice things and see commonalities between things, recognize relationships between things on their own, and you kind of go from there. So that's
for the purposes of the Defense Against the Dark Arts curriculum I'm working on, we'll say that rather than teaching a children something, it's awakening the adults to the fact that you're not just audience. The audience spell is pretty powerfully in effect here. So what's the next phase?
Here's the life of a great Greek. Here's the life of a great Roman. Here are their virtues. Here's the way that they failed. Here's the ways they succeeded. All that stuff, right? So and
virtue architecture might be the next part.
Yes, but again, sort of like allowing the child to kind of build that for themselves. right? So you spread the banquet for the child. Here's all the beautiful things. Here's all the best things. Here's all the best stories, right? The family life and, you know, having real embodied experiences in the world through sports, which are important, and through other things. But then ultimately, you know, developing their own tastes, right? Learning to pick and choose the evil or choose the good. Don't choose the evil. Choose the good and despise the evil, kind of a thing. So we, you know, there's also a big emphasis on Shakespeare. Man, y'all are sleeping on Shakespeare. There's so many of Shakespeare's stories which have just really fundamental patterns of humanity and virtue and what it means to be a person, and also like how do we navigate the, you know, collapse of society around us, and how do we navigate tragedy, and how do we navigate comedy, and like all these things. Like that stuff is all in Shakespeare, and I think that you know, I'm excited for when people inevitably start getting into it, because yeah, I think that's gonna
you heard it here, folks.
Yeah,
you heard it corner is damn near caught up to the Richard 6-year-olds. Oh, that's so painful. This is a painful reflection. So
and then, you know, the other thing that I'll mention is a really big part of this education is something called narration. You read a portion of a story, or you read like a short, you know, like a fairy tale or something, and then you say, now tell it back to me in your own words. It's not a test. There's no grade. And if they get something wrong, you don't correct them. You just say, tell it back to me in your own words, and then they narrate it back to you. By retelling something in your own words, you are synthesizing it, and also actually learning how to tell a story, by the way. You're synthesizing it, and you're relating it to the other information you already have. I cannot stress how important this is, and how difficult it is to do as an adult if you are not, if you haven't practiced. But if you do this when they're young, before their minds have been just totally, you know, eviscerated. If you do this, if you do this when they're young, then what they actually are learning is the habit of attention, right? And what they're learning is, you know, what you guys sometimes call like relevance, realization, all the stuff. The ability to read something, or to hear a story, or to be presented with facts or something like that, and actually to pick through what are the important things here, and then to synthesize it into their own narrative, and to connect it to the things that they've already experienced. So this is the most, I say, one of the most fundamental parts of this kind of education. So
fascinating, because like from the angle I see things now, what you're saying to me lands like, well, Vanderclay's basically doing narrative synthesis and teaching people how to do that, and that's why you see these little pop-up channels trying it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so.
So we're coming together and doing this re-education things somehow. I don't know if you're at all familiar with anything I'm doing over here, but this is a beholder.
I've watched probably like 5 or 6 of your videos.
The things that have developed that starting to resemble classes for the project I have is like clip reapers.
Okay.
Like, you know how your instructions, like it's like read a long piece and then pull out the key points and tell us in your own version.
Yeah.
Where it's like that, except they're watching really long videos, and instead of when they pull out the key points, they're doing it in clips.
Yeah.
And then they bring them like around the campfire. We do these fancy reapers harvests, so everybody can, you know, like you found something valuable, you bring it to the village, and that's, we do it show and tell.
Yeah.
So that's one character class, is reapers. I'm trying to get there to be an accountability stalker class. An accountability stalker is somebody who doesn't let a cast member, for better terms, forget what they said they'd do.
Oh, sure, yeah.
There's the art of spinning the clips into a cohesive narrative that's looming at the moment. But I don't know. Would being somebody like you be a class?
I mean, I've always kind of thought of myself as a bard, I guess, just in terms of really storytelling. If you want to gamify the thing that I do, I'm a troubadour, right? I'm a wandering bard, right? I don't have my own place where I live. I don't have my own channel that I live on. But you know, I just sort of I wander from channel to channel, from station to station, then I show up and I tell my little stories for my supper, you know. So anyway, I like a sort of like a perennial guest host, I guess you could say. At first it was weird, and now I just don't think about it. I think if you think about these things, then they can become like a little dangerous. But you know, like one of the most fatal things you can do as a person is take yourself too seriously. And there's no better way to not take yourself seriously than making a fool of yourself on the internet.
Do you have anything you want to say in conclusion?
You know, go tell stories, guys. We spend way too much time in this little corner talking about things and maybe not quite enough time doing them. So I would encourage people to go and tell stories. I strongly recommend tabletop gaming. It's where you should start if you're trying to recover your imagination as an adult. So yeah, that's what I'll say.
I love it. All right, thanks, Richard. This has been great.
Thanks. This has been a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.